welcome to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Scharf's real-world advice for well-intentioned humans. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger.
I'm Kate Scharf.
Hello there, Kate.
Hi, Jane.
Kate, today our topic is separated under the same roof, the pros, the cons, and strategies for living together after you've decided to divorce.
Oh, this is a biggie. I always say some
I
version.
know you do.
I always say, this one's a big, this is a hard, this is a toughie. This one's complicated.
Yeah,
Okay.
But this one actually is a real biggie.
It's a big biggie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do we got?
Well, I have a couple of emails I wanted to share today. Let me start with our first one, which is from Dan. Dan writes, "My partner and I have agreed to break up. We have twins in second grade, and neither of us wants their lives disrupted. We've read a lot about nesting, and that seems like the best option. The kids can live in our house, and one of us, who isn't on duty, can stay in an apartment that we'll both use. What's the best way to introduce this idea to the children?" And now I have one other, a very different one from Caitlin. "When my husband told me he didn't want to do couple therapy anymore and was going to move out, I was devastated. At first, I begged him to stay in the house while we worked on our marriage. I thought he might change his mind during that time, but it's been 3 months with him sleeping in the guest room, and it hurts so much I can't stand it. I don't want my marriage to be over, but having him here and not here is killing me. What should I do?" I know.
Well, first of all, I think I'm glad you picked two emails because both Dan and Caitlin are struggling with some of the same issues, and then, of course, some that are quite different. But what's the same is that they're trying to figure out, how to deal with the tension between the idea of a separation or potential physical separation. What should that look like? And then the question of an emotional separation. Dan doesn't reference that in his email. No. He doesn't talk about, the feelings he has about separating from his partner.
Right.
But the truth is that there are huge emotional implications for the choice to rotate in and out of the marital home.
Yes.
And the fact that he doesn't mention the feelings doesn't mean he's not thinking about them or having them, all of that. Caitlin is, got her pain right out there front and center and really talking about the struggle, about wanting her husband there with her. Of course, the reconciliation fantasy, sort of, there it is again. It's in every episode. The wish to hold on to the partner who is really already emotionally checked out. But she's come the dawning recognition that, it's very, very painful to have the ongoing rejection of somebody who, won't respond to your touch or maybe even your looks, won't meet your gaze or whatever.
Kate, and I was so struck by her saying something that I think is so painful when she said having him here and not here.
Yeah.
That mixture is so difficult for spouses and for kids.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
That is actually, I think you put your finger on something that is probably, I don't know. They say this a lot about a lot of things. It's one of the most painful things about divorce.
Yeah.
But it really, really is, that the person who was once, your romantic partner, your best friend, your go-to person, even if it wasn't a perfect marriage, was very central.
Right.
Suddenly they become like a zombie person, like a pod person. Like they're
exactly.
It's their body, but it's not their them.
Right.
It's a terrible thing. I think it goes to something primitive in us, where if you've ever had the experience as a child if you had a depressed parent or a parent who had a bad day and came in and were not themselves.
They were there, but not there, as she says.
It puts panic into a child's heart, and they notice it, as you've often aptly pointed out. They're so exquisitely kids are so exquisitely attuned. We can't hide anything from them.
Right.
So they know if you're not really there, and it puts them in a state of panic.
Right. And so this is going to play into what you're saying later, but this idea of sometimes it's easier just not to have them there at all. And we'll discuss the different permutations.
It has to be in the math. Yeah. So, so maybe, I wrote a blog post back in my Huffington Post days, which was really about people who, for a variety of reasons, are either have to or have decided to live together in the marital home for some period of time before, during, and after their split. And I'm glad that you brought us these 2 emails, because I'm thinking of this as an expanded version of that original piece, where instead of just talking about people who do this by choice or by necessity for some short period of time, to include the whole range of reasons that people do it and live, in the marital home, like all the time or part of the time together as part of a divorce or separation process. So I thought maybe I would, see if this makes sense to you, talk about sort of the broad categories of ways of sharing marital space during divorce and some of the pros and cons, and then move into some practical tips for navigating if those are choices you're making.
That sounds really helpful. And I think people, including myself, would like to really understand the concept of nesting, which sounds like it's a choice that people make, a very deliberate choice.
Let's start with that.
Okay.
Has this come up in your couple therapy practice a lot as a concept? And what have you heard about it? Like, what have people been saying to you?
Again, I don't have a huge sample with this very thing.
Stop. No more disclaimers, please. The truth is nobody has a lot of experience with this, because it's not actually statistically that common of a way of coping, but
right. I have seen it more as aspirational than something that has really worked for my people. It's like, this sounds like a great idea and maybe we can pull this off. And it's been actually kind of problematic in my sample.
So before I get into defining it, is it your sense that your patients have been choosing nesting as a way of making divorce less painful for them or for their kids?
Well, you ask a really good question, because I think the conscious thought is that it's making it less painful for the kids.
Okay.
Right?
So they're doing it not for financial reasons necessarily.
No, they're doing it because they think it is the least disruptive option for the kids.
Are they doing, thinking of it as a medium or long-term solution, or is a short-term?
That's a really good question. We haven't moved beyond the short-term-ish with my patients.
Okay. Well,
I'll be interested to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's how people often think about it.
Yeah.
So nesting, or bird nesting, which is the term really, refers to an idea in which children, during divorce, stay put in the marital home and the parents rotate in and out according to some schedule. Sometimes people do it as a kind of bridge between the time of separation and the time when they've worked out the finances so they can split into 2 households. Sometimes, so that's sort of not really a proactive choice. It's more of a kind of, lesser of 2 evils. They can't live together anymore. But they're, they tell the kids, we're getting divorced and we're going to be living in 2 separate places. But for now, you're going to stay put, and mommy and daddy and I are going to rotate in and out. There are pros and cons to that. It's fraught. We'll talk about that in a minute. Other people do it as a sort of way of coping with a real ambivalence, really not being sure if they want to get divorced or not, like what they call a trial separation.
Yes.
One way of doing a trial separation. And they sometimes decide, we're going to work on the marriage, but we're going to live in 2 places, but we don't want to disrupt the kids because we're not sure if we're going to get divorced. Well, right. Okay. I mean, we're going to talk about that. That's obviously extremely complicated.
Yes.
Some people do it because they really are planning to get divorced, but they think if they do this interim step, it'll be like pulling the Band-Aid off more slowly.
Yeah.
And this is sort of getting to your point about, well, I haven't really heard a lot about this. it's because it's not common, but there are a few people, and I always get letters when I say anything negative about nesting from the very few people who have successfully managed it as a way of raising kids. And they swear by it. And I believe them that it works for them for whatever they have pixie dust, you know, and it works for them with their dynamic, and they really don't want to disrupt their kids' lives. And they have managed to peacefully co-parent and move in and out of the same house.
You know, I'm just so, and maybe we'll address this later, but I'm thinking about what if you have a new partner, a new person you're dating? What do you?
Yeah. Well,
you know?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the really big complicating factors that people sometimes fail to anticipate.
Right.
I don't know if they fail to anticipate it as much as it just seems so far off.
Right.
Or they think that, the partner is going to be okay. I don't really know. I mean, maybe they think by then everybody's going to be buddies.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Or, you know what? I don't want to think that far in the future.
Right.
Which, by the way, when you're anxious and depressed, which often people are in this state,
yes.
the future just doesn't feel that important. Like, it's all about the present.
You're so right.
And just to add to the various X factors around nesting, so I've listed lots of ways people do it, and there are many more reasons and ways. But the other question is, where's the off-duty parent going to be when the on-duty parent is in the house with the kids?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, because money is often a driver for this, it's not just this idea of keeping the kids in one place, although that's a big one. It's often money.
Yeah.
We don't really have the money to split into two houses.
Yes.
Or we don't have the money to split into two houses this nice, and nobody wants to be in the apartment. We've talked about this in other episodes, you know, what is really important to a kid. You know, do they really need two houses that are equally fancy? We don't think so, but it comes up.
Right.
You know, the question of, well, are we going to just rent one apartment and rotate in and out of it when we're not? Well, that's really complicated. Are we going to rent two? Are we going to couch surf? What if one person has family or a best friend with a guest house and the other person is like stuck in an Airbnb? You know, those are all the issues that come up too. I guess you're getting the flavor that it's really not a simple decision.
Right.
Okay. So the real quickie sort of pros on nesting. It is cheaper than getting two places. And often early on, you know, you need time to figure out finances before you can split into two households. It is true that kids do not have to move back and forth. And if, you know, I don't know, if you can manage it and, you know, for a variety of reasons, you have figured out the kinks, which we're going to talk about, or a variety, you know, if you have been able to do that.
Yes.
For some kids, especially very young kids.
Yes.
And I think we're going to have to do a carve out for very young kids. In fact, like, make a note, Eric, like, we need to do an episode on babies, because babies in custody, like
Kate, that's really important.
Because I would have a whole different talk on nesting if we were talking about an 8-month-old.
Yes.
So, you know, they don't have to move back and forth. You know, that's a pro, I guess. It's a con too, and we'll talk about that. But it's a pro. It does give you a sort of way of, if you're fighting and you can't be in the same house anymore, it gives you some way of having some space while you're working on your divorce negotiations. Takes the temperature down, often necessary. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the cons of nesting. So if money is tight, you know, so far I've only talked about a situation in which parents rotate in and out of one apartment or couch surf, or Of course, there is always the other option of getting two other apartments or two other homes. But most people don't want to spend the money doing that, feel it's too unwieldy for a temporary situation, or just simply cannot afford it.
Right.
That's like, I mean, that's almost everybody. So so the idea of having one place, which is probably the most common solution, one, like usually a studio apartment where you are when you are not in the home with the children, may sound good on paper, but when you put it into practice, it's really difficult.
Oh, I can think of so many potential
Yeah.
problems with that.
Put some out there. Like,
I don't know, finding whatever recreational activities signs of are going on when you are in the house with your kids. I mean, a little too much information.
And that can happen at either end.
Well, that's right.
I mean, what you're really saying is there's no privacy.
Right.
And it's, I mean, the studio apartment, which by the way, nobody wants to be alone in a studio apartment when they could be at home with their children. It's so lonely.
Yes.
And so artificial and so sudden, and you're in a space that isn't even your own solo space. Like when you're not there, the person you're separating from is up in your stuff.
Right.
You're sleeping in the same bed. Like, you know, it's a very intimate, and you know, there's a lot of hard feelings that accrue around evidence of whatever in that space. Evidence of dating is the main thing, but it might be other things that are conflictual, like drinking or, you know, recreational drug use, or
their clothing, dresser,
and then, there's all this stuff, and this happens at both ends. Like, who didn't do the laundry? Who left dirty dishes? Like, I mean, there's a lot of ways for feelings to get hurt and just to feel nomadic and just horrible.
Right.
In some ways, worse, I think.
Yeah.
It's emotionally incredibly confusing for you for the reasons we've been talking about and more. And actually, the nesting can be very confusing for kids. Right. It is a sort of netherworld of like togetherness and separateness, and we'll get into that a little more in a minute. But you know, if you haven't told your kids yet that you're splitting up, you know, it may, you know, people do this all the time. Well, I travel for work half the month anyway, so I'll just be in the apartment and tell them I'm out of town. Yeah, good luck fooling your kids with that. Right. It's just, we've talked about this. You can't fool them. Like, they'll figure, they just know.
Yes.
So it can work for a couple weeks, maybe even a month. But, you know, as an end run around telling your kids that you have a split, you know, it doesn't work. And if they do know that you're getting separated, but you're rotating in and out of the same house, then it's sort of, you know, it's enough like real life that and, you know, and not enough like a real separation, because you're still functioning out of the same home. And there will inevitably be times when you're both in the same home at transitions, you know, holding on to that reconciliation fantasy.
Right. It would seem that would stimulate that fantasy more than some other options.
I think so.
Right.
Then there's the question of, well, you know, are we presenting this as permanent or temporary? You know, there are feelings around all of that.
Yes.
And really what I think, to get back to the emotionally confusing thing, is that I just think when you're in a period of time where, you know, maybe 5 minutes ago, a week, a month ago, you shared everything with this person. And I'm not, like, I realize marriages deteriorate, right? So it's not like you went from, you know, bliss to, although some people do experience it that way, that it's sort of out of the blue. Really, mostly there's a shared sense of deterioration.
Yes.
It still doesn't become real until something makes it real. So even if you're moving into like a nesting situation in which you're together sometimes, not together sometimes, it's just heartrending. You know, this was the person you shared everything with, including time with your kids, a social life, a bathroom, a bed. And now it's awkward when you accidentally reach for the same fork, right? So regardless of the kind of relationship you have, whether you know, the very sight of each other induces nausea, or at least in one of you, or you've kind of achieved a fragile stability, or you're kind of, you know, fake friends, it's going to feel surreal. It just is. So adding on top of that, not having a space where you can nest yourself in any, I mean,
exactly.
This isn't really nesting at all, right? This is the opposite of nesting.
Absolutely.
It's the idea that the kids stay in the nest. But, you know, as we've talked about before, home is a state of mind, and it's you. So we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But I mean, I guess my prejudice here is showing, and that I think it can work sometimes, but it's a very complex choice.
It is such a complex one. Yeah.
Okay. So that's nesting and a few of its various permutations. Let's discuss very briefly this other category of togetherness, untogetherness, in which people are sort of stuck living in the same home after having been told they're getting a divorce or mutually deciding that they are. There are a lot of reasons this happens. This is much more common than nesting. It happens, actually, some version of it, I think I said earlier, it happens with most couples. And
so you're saying this is not a choice. We're talking about when people are stuck in the same home together.
Well, it's not a choice in the sense that it is not a proactive strategy for it isn't an active choice that usually happens to avoid something worse.
Okay.
More than just destabilizing the kids, although that's not universally true. There are some people who decide to stay together under the same roof for a variety of reasons, but usually it's very much in order to avoid, for example, things like losing leverage in custody negotiation. I'm not leaving until I have an agreement.
Right. You do see that a lot. Yes.
Or we actually think nesting is a terrible idea. So we're going to, do this. We're going to fake it until we're ready to tell the kids something, which actually is not necessarily a bad idea, but can be very painful if it stretches out over a long period of time. I think money is the biggest reason people do it. That either they are in the, sometimes it is because they've been advised not to move out until they figure out the finances and or the custody. But often it's just they can't figure out a way. They don't want to nest or they can't afford to nest and to maintain the big house, even if the other thing is a studio. It's just the house. They can't afford the house. So they really don't move until they have figured out their finances. And that's a process that takes some time to free up cash, to figure out how they're going to split into two households. I think that's really probably the most common reason. But also, there is usually a period of days or weeks or months between the time that somebody decides to leave and the time they really decide to leave, or they sort of stay a little longer until the other partner is ready to tell the kids in a way that's constructive. I mean, I support those decisions.
Though I have heard clients say those are the darkest days.
They are really awful, and that's why I call it the limbo phase.
Yes.
This is the thing I call the limbo phase, when your marriage is dead or on its last, and it's on a respirator, and you're no longer separated. You're no longer together, but you're not yet physically separated. It is, I think, the most painful for many, many people. But sometimes it's unavoidable. And sometimes that darkness needs to creep in order to recognize the inevitability or the necessity or accept that there are things worse than a terrible marriage. So you've got the flavor here that there are a lot of reasons that people might be living together under the same roof, and it can be horrible in the way that you're describing because it's so sad. It can be horrible because there's fighting. There are lots of kinds of fightings. I sometimes say there's a cold war, there's a hot war.
Yes.
There's a kind of tepid war. None of them are benign. Yes. But regardless of the reason or how long it's going on, or, whether you've gotten advice to do this or you both are in agreement to do this, I think it's helpful to have a plan. And it may need to change, but to have a shared plan and some strategies for coping. And I think that they're mostly relevant for whether you're nesting or in the limbo phase unhappily. So why don't I just talk about some of them? I'll talk about, which are relevant for which situation and how it might look in each of these situations.
Great. So you're going to talk about some strategies.
And things to dial up your awareness of, really. Dialing up your awareness is a strategy in and of itself.
Yes.
Actually, for all divorce, dial up your awareness of how you're feeling, how other people are feeling, how it's going. And remember, you can change things. Okay, so here's one. Let's call this number one. And this is definitely relevant for nesting or the limbo phase. Sit down with your future ex, or if you can't sit down with him or her, do your own thinking and run it by them via email. And if you can't even do that, then just keep it in your own head, but come up with some guidelines for interacting during this period. I mean, it might seem ridiculous, but I really believe that the more clear you are in your own mind and with them, your future ex, about your mutual expectations of each other during this period, the less room there will be for hard feelings and misunderstanding, right? That could actually ramp up conflict for the whole process and for your future. And I'm really talking like get granular here. Like who is going to cook, right? If you're nesting, is there going to be, when, depending on when the transition times are, like, is there dinner going to be made already? Is it just for the kids or is it for both of you? What is that expectation? Who's going to, are you going to have same groceries?
Don't even think of these things.
Are you going to share groceries? Who's going to shop for them? Who's going to clean the house?
Oh my gosh, I can see a situation like with food sort of cordoned off within the refrigerator.
People act like, like bad college roommates.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
You ate my bagels that were sent from New York. Like,
right.
Right. But really sort of, especially if these were already charged topics, like, if we have someone who comes and helps, with that cleaning the house, she comes every 2 weeks. Is she going to come on my day or your day? Like, who gets the benefit of it? Yeah. I mean, there's just so many of these things, but the more you can talk about, the better. Another piece of it is how will you communicate? How often? By what means? Are you going to sleep in the same bedroom while you're there? Are you going to feel like you can have an agreement not to go through each other's stuff? I mean, there's all of those worries about privacy, especially during a contested divorce. But I really think to be as clear with each other as you can, now, honestly, had you been able to be super clear with each other, you might not be getting divorced.
I was thinking, Kate.
But if you try it as an exercise with yourself, it'll help you to remember how many of these things are going to be landmines, potential landmines, so that you can expect it or prepare for it. And maybe kind of manage your own reactivity and pick your battles, maybe. So you might be furious that the kids' clothes are all filthy when you get home after your period. But is that you going to die on that field that day, or are you going to keep that feeling to yourself because you have mediation the next day?
Right. So
that where you're going to discuss the distribution of assets. That's important. Maybe not the laundry. Maybe, but we do get triggered. Okay. Either situation, this one comes up more around living together. So this is my tip number 2.
Yes.
Decide what you're going to tell people in your orbit, right? Your friends, your acquaintances, your extended family. So the reason I say it comes up more for people who are in the limbo phase rather than nesting, although it can come up in nesting too, is that nesting is a more public separation. Right. And typically people who are nesting don't show up at soccer games together.
Right.
Although they might, but they typically don't. But when you are living together in the same home, you have to think about the timing. Are you going to continue for now to present yourselves as a couple, or, as a intact family in the old way? Or are you going to come out, as separated and divorced? Remember, whatever the message is you send out is going to make your way back to your kids. So think very carefully about what they know and what they don't know, and don't do anything that they are not already a part of, that they already know about.
Kate, those are words to live by.
Yeah. Again, this is often comes up for people who are living together. You talk about like the pain of, back to Caitlin's email, the pain of living with someone who's there and not there. So that's why it usually comes up in those situations, but it can come up in nesting too. It's likely that one of you is going to want more interaction than the other, right? It's usually the person who initiated the divorce and is emotionally kind of further down the road. And they may act really offended that you need space, that they might accuse you of being snippy or nasty or creating conflict or fighting in front of the kids because it's painful to interact with them. Oh. And so think about that when you're planning your schedule. Is it, and actually we should talk about schedule, about the kids' schedule in a second, but when you are planning, how you're going to handle the transitions and whether there's going to be any time that you're both in the house at the same time and, all of that, think about how it goes, not in your ideal world, but in your real world when the two of you are in the same space.
Yes.
And if your future ex is not behaving in the friendly way that you wish they would, accept it. Time is your friend on this one. Don't push it. And consider that when you are thinking about the rules of engagement, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, okay, so let's just talk about the schedule here. As you need to be as clear as you need to be about the protocols for living together, you need to be even clearer about the schedule for sharing time with your kids. And when I say that, I mean really get like street level on this one.
Yes.
Really granular. It's really complicated, especially if you have little kids, but doesn't matter. You need to think through every day, like who does what now when you're living together, who gets the kids up in the morning, right? And do they have to be gotten up or do they get you up? Who typically feeds them breakfast? Who gets them ready for school? Who packs their lunches? Who takes them to school? Who gets them if they're sick at school? Who picks them up from whatever the end of their day looks like? Who takes them home? Who's with them? Until.
Hey, why is this different from the pre-divorce way the family is functioning?
Because if you are nesting or if you are doing this other thing, which some people try to do, which is create an in-house separation.
Okay.
Where they're trying to do a sort of trial run of what a custody schedule might look like by spending separate time in the home, which is its own set of complicated issues. Because when you are starting to divide up duties and you can't just tag team in the same moment, you really need to be real about who can do what. You need to be real about two things. Three things. Who can do what? So, are you really going to be able to do breakfast with the kids if they get up at 7, you need to leave for work at 6:30? Right? I said three things, right? So who can do what? Who really is available to pick the kids up after daycare? Or does a nanny do it? And who's really available to do dinner? Well, maybe, neither of you gets home by 7, or maybe one of you really gets home at 5:30, mostly between 5:30 and 6, and one of you, really it's closer to 8. And then, in terms of bedtime, well, when you were married, your future ex was probably pretty pissed off at you when you showed up 15 minutes before lights out. But maybe that was a compromise you made. But you really can't do that and take over and say, I'm on duty now when the kids need to be asleep in 15 minutes. So I'm saying be real and accept what is it you can do. Then the other thing is you have to think about, okay, of the things that I can do once we come up with a schedule, and the schedule may just be an interim schedule that you realize is temporary until you can be in 2 separate households. Of the things that you can do, how many of them can you tolerate having the other parent do or, while you're in the house? Or how many of them can you do and still be together in the home, even if you're somewhere else in the house? Can you divide up time with the kids while one of you is still there but not there?
Yes.
And here I would say, proceed with caution. It's very painful to feel excluded, like you can't say goodnight to your own kid.
Gosh,
but if you go in there, you're going to stir up all kinds of, feelings of the other parent of being intruded on, and you're going to get the kids, to, want to engage you, and you're going to push bedtime back by half an hour. And the other thing is, I'm sorry, but if you're in the house and your kid knows it and they come to you for help with a math problem, you're not going to say, I'm sorry, honey, but, your dad's on duty.
Right.
You're just not. So it feels really awful to have to make yourself scarce. This is like if you're in the limbo phase and you're both sharing
Yes.
that. But I really suggest that you do. Like that when you come up with a schedule and you divide it, there are exceptions for this, but really mainly I think you should find that, find your off-duty time as time to go to the gym.
What about the kid yelling, I want daddy at bedtime when he's...
Right. Well, if daddy's in the house, that's why he's doing it. They're going to do that. I mean,
Yes.
they do that, and they do want daddy. And I think it's one of the reasons the limbo phase is terribly painful, because they know daddy's coming home that night.
Yes.
And sometimes actually kids will like buck bedtime because they want to push it until daddy does come home. And they know he kind of comes, especially if you cut it close and you come home at 10 after 8 and bedtime's at 8, like they hear you come in, they're going to get up, they're going to yell for you. It's very complicated. You can, I mean, I could go on, but you get the gist. What about it? Well, right. I mean, exactly. What about it? And it can create a lot of conflict between parents because, the on-duty parent says, well, they're asking for you, but it's my time. And if you go in, you're just going to make it impossible for me to put them to bed. And, the other parent will say, well, I'm their parent. Like, I'm not going to not go.
Right.
Nesting, it's a little bit easier because they know you're not in the house.
Right.
But it doesn't stop it from being a problem.
Yeah.
Now, I would say there are some exceptions. There are exceptions to this. Like I have seen it go okay where parents divide up the duties, especially if there's more than one kid. Like divide up duties, are still in the same house, and still can have a sense of sort of enhanced separation with the kid's knowledge or not for a short period of time without this problem you're describing becoming awful, especially if they kind of already did that.
Well, that's the point.
And a lot of people do that. They do it because of their differences in their schedules. Somebody does the morning, somebody does the evening, or they do it because it's sort of nice to have the one-on-one time with your kid at night, or because it's hard to bathe two kids at the same time, so they tag team anyway. So that if it fits with your norm, it's a lot easier. And I actually think if the limbo phase is pretty short, and you're doing it so you can get some ducks in a row. So when you have the talk with your kids, you can give them all the information they need, or the basic information they need, which is a really good idea. Like where they're going to live, when they're going to see you, the basic stuff that kids want to know. Then I think, and you aren't fighting, you can handle it for some short period of time. I actually think it's fine to go on parenting in the same old way for some short period of time. I mean, doing things, parenting together. I don't mean living in the same old way. I don't mean having a romantic relationship, but I mean in terms of the face you show to the kids for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. But I think, being willing to change course if one of you gets very upset about it, or if it becomes acrimonious, then I do suggest, even for a short period of time, divide time with the kids in a way that will sort of anticipate how you think you're going to do it post.
Yeah, that makes good
post
sense.
Physical split. All right. Just a couple other points. If you are dating, whether it's the limbo phase or you're nesting or some combination of those things, like if you're already doing it, okay, I know you're not going to stop. Just be discreet as you possibly can. Keep it to your off-duty time. Try not to leave evidence because, okay, you're getting divorced, but you're not divorced yet, and to poke the bear, like it's not kind, and it's not smart. And really, it's a very tall order, and maybe not even possible because kids can read us so well, but just don't be in contact with that person while you're with your children. I mean, to the extent that you can. And if you're not already dating, or you're only dating casually, like maybe don't, right now. Maybe wait until you're really physically separated.
Yes.
Actually, I'd like it if you could wait a little longer than that. But,
but often it doesn't happen that way.
No, and sometimes people are already in relationships. Just do the best you can to protect your ex. And if you don't like the idea of protecting your ex, think of it as an emotional strategy, because the less upset they are, the better everything will go. And you're really doing it to protect your children. Right. Because the more upset they are, the more upset your kids will be. And your kids are not ready for this. Finally, I said it before, but I'll just say it again because it's so important. The first questions that kids have about divorce are practical. Older kids will ask why too, but they really want to know the
basic
stuff.
Where will I live? What? Yeah.
Right. Like, where will I live? Like, when will I see you? What will I have to give up? What can I expect to keep in place? So, we so-called experts usually recommend holding off telling the kids about the split until you can answer those questions. But, as we've said over and over again, they're emotional sponges, these guys. Yes. And they're not going to be fooled into thinking it's business as usual if it isn't. And in the absence of real answers, they'll make up their own. And they're probably going to be their own answers are going to be a lot more scary than the reality.
Right. That is important to remember.
I mean, think about what kids make up when you won't tell a 6-year-old where babies come from, or the 6-year-old version of it.
Yes.
I mean, they tell you they come out of your bottom, like babies come out of your bottom. Like for me, that's a scarier idea than
it's this idea of having no control and not knowing anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Then whatever you can imagine
might be.
That. Yeah. So generally I say, unless it's one of these situations that is short until you can get some ducks in a row, don't try to hide the reality of what you're doing. Don't hide that you're nesting. If you're doing an in-house separation and it goes on for a while, don't hide that. If you're sleeping, especially if you're, I have people tell me they don't know, their kids don't know that they're having an in-house separation, but they've suddenly moved into, the basement apartment.
Yes.
They know.
Right.
And the kids only spend time with them in the basement apartment. Yeah. So I guess basically I'm saying, and really, if you have decided to use a nesting arrangement or a limbo phase arrangement as a way of slowly introducing the idea of separateness to your kids so that it doesn't all come to them in a great whoosh that you're divorcing, like that pulling the Band-Aid off.
Right.
So don't do that.
Yeah.
Because I have always thought that pulling the Band-Aid off slower is much more painful than doing it fast.
Exactly. And fast is faster than slow.
Yeah, fast is faster than slow. And that's a great way of putting it. And also, slow is crazy making when they know something, what we've been saying. Like the kind of the lack of information when they know there's information to be had. But I'm going to end with this, which is I live in the real world of divorce, and I know that it never goes exactly the way you'd like it to go. And so if your limbo phase goes on for months, if your nesting arrangement isn't, protecting your kids or working out for you in the way that you thought it would, be real with each other about that and think about changing courses. But in the meantime, if it's really hard for you, then it's really hard for your kids. Yeah. Forget everything I said about they needing to know the basics before you tell them anything. Tell them what you can. Yeah. Just do it. Just tell them what you can, including what you don't know yet. But with a promise that you'll tell them when you do. I'm not a big fan of the temporary separation that you don't tell kids about. I'm not a big fan of the temporary separation when kids involved because it puts them in their own limbo phase for a long time. But if that is what you're doing, you need to tell them that is what you're doing.
I think that's such an important reminder.
Sometimes you have to give kids very difficult truths in order to avoid them making up worse ones. That's what we're saying. Yeah. So I'm just encouraging people to be direct with your kids. And if you can't figure out how to do that constructively, because it's really, really hard with these complicated issues, get help. Yes. It's a plug for hiring a mental health professional, maybe a therapist, maybe a divorce coach, which is basically a therapist with expertise in this area who calls themselves a divorce coach. Yes. But it really doesn't have to be a divorce coach. It really just actually couple therapists are often very helpful because they can't avoid working with divorcing couples, right? You don't call yourself a divorce expert, but actually you are because you have a longstanding psychotherapy practice and it's part of life. And bring it to them as, go in together. If you can, go in separately if you can't, and bring the set of issues and noodle it through with them. And, if they can't tell you the exact right answer, but you can work out a first run at it and make adjustments as necessary.
And Kate, I guess what I just want to remind us all is you in this case are doing our favorite thing. You're loving your children more than you hate your ex. You're working together as best you can to make this the least traumatic and painful experience possible. It takes a lot of work, a lot of discipline, a lot of self-control to try to adhere to these rules or these arrangements, but boy, is it important.
Amen. You said it. That's great. I'm glad you put that little punctuation mark on the end. It's really what it's all about. Okay, so now we are at our spliticism section.
My favorite time.
This is where we kind of end our show with our little pearls of, I don't know, they're not really pearls of wisdom. They're and I'm not even sure they're cultured pearls. Like I would, I'd say these are not mined diamonds. These are more like lab
created. Lab created. Definitely.
Yes. Okay. So here's mine. For the day. It's kind of like, it might feel like a weird one, but it hit me, today when I was preparing for the show. Okay. Be prepared to not read a novel for a year. Really. Even if you have been a voracious reader your entire life. I mean, I love to read. This is true for me. You may find that during the time that you are going through, especially the early phases of your divorce, you just can't do it. Yeah. You cannot read a book. You pick it up, you get through a sentence, you reread the sentence, you fall asleep, your mind wanders to whatever, divorce related or not, and you just can't get through it. I think this is pretty common. I've heard this from a lot of friends, from patients and clients. I think it's for a lot of reasons. First of all, you just have a lot on your mind, so you're distracted. But reading a book is reading about other people's stories. And I think during this phase of our lives, we're very ordinarily, normally, expectably, is that a word? Expectably, preoccupied with our own stories. Yes. And, I don't really know if fiction is particularly appealing when your own life is beginning to feel like somebody else's story, somebody else's narrative, like a fiction, right? Like it's not the book you were writing. So I would try not to fight this too, like not to worry, not to think of it as permanent. Like it's not a permanent condition. I mean, some people can't even, read like People magazine, or whatever their version of it. They can't do anything. But I don't know. I think you can just wait for your inner bibliophile to reemerge, and you'll come out of your fog and, rejoin your book club if they haven't fired you. They won't fire you because they've all been through this already. Sad but true.
Let me tag that spliticism with this idea that you may read too much, but of the wrong stuff. I have another ancillary spliticism I want to add in a moment. But, as you said to me, we're not working when we're going through a divorce to become an expert on everything divorce. Don't torment yourself with every blog, every divorce moms or divorced dads guide to recovery from divorce. It can be very addictive. It can actually be really unhelpful after a while.
Sure.
And you're living divorce. Your head is only full of the big D word 24/7. Give yourself a break.
It's like you're a professional getting divorced person.
Right. Yeah. And there is actually, we hope, and we know, more to life than that. And I just want to add as part 2, you will like music again someday.
Oh, yeah.
You will like music again. We're here to attest to that. It can be so painful. Haven't you had people talk about that and experience yourself? You can't listen to the radio. You can't. It's like a dagger to the heart.
Well, music is so evocative. That's when we, I remember I met him at this yes, I think that's right. I totally agree with what you're saying, although suggesting that people limit their intake of divorce advice is terrible marketing for us. So I would just say, like, if
except for this podcast,
right? If there's let's say a podcasting pair that you really groove on, that they really are speaking to you, or I really mean it. If there's an author you like or a blogger you like, okay, we're not suggesting you shouldn't seek out advice. Right. I think we're just saying don't use it as a substitute for just having this crappy experience you're having that you will move through.
Exactly.
And trying to do it perfectly just puts extra pressure on you. Right?
Exactly. And I guess I want to also say that if you're feeling like, you're just listening to a couple of people you think are really, really helpful, don't hesitate to send them emails sharing what your situation is, what you might want them to talk about.
Yeah, like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good advice. Thanks, Jane.
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharf's real-world advice for well-intentioned humans. We invite you to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Divorce for Humans. That's divorce, the number 4 humans. And on YouTube at Divorce on Planet Earth. That way you'll know when we have a new blog post, video, or podcast. Speaking of blogs, you can read Kate's at divorceonplanetearth.com. And if you have a general divorce question or an idea for a show topic, please write us at info@divorceonplanetearth.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we promise not to share your personal information, including real name and email address. Please remember that the ideas we share here can never fully address any one listener's specific situation and are not offered as therapy or divorce coaching and are not intended as a substitute for clinical services. Divorce on Planet Earth is produced by Eric Peguero. Our music was composed by Ben Kaunitz. I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger.
And I'm Kate Sharf. And can I just say, go Caps?
Oh, totally. Yay. Podcast on that next time. Okay. Talk to you next time.
Bye.